Eric, why didn't I get a script this week?
No script today. We're doing this Godard style, completely off the cuff, pure spontaneity, just static and buzz.
Are you sure that's a good idea?
I'm lying. I've got like 12 pages of notes and a phonetics guide, but Godard was lying about Breathless, so I'm lying about this. I'm Eric Trometer.
I'm Jennifer Trujillo.
I'm Sheila Blume.
I'm Erin Brown, and this is World Cinema History.
We spent last week with the locksmith, Membeti, picking the colonial lock with a motorcycle and a zoom lens. But today, the road to Godard takes us back to the architect. In 1966, Ousmane Sembène didn't just make a movie, he laid the foundation. He was a dock worker, a union leader, a novelist, and he realized that if he wanted to reach his people, at least the 90% who didn't read in French, he had to stop writing and start projecting. This isn't just a film, it's a blueprint for a continent's identity. Now, we're a pirate podcast coming to you from the basement, recording on hardware that cost less than you spent to feed your cat. We do know one thing, but it's not how to pronounce African names. If you hear some pronunciation issues throughout this episode, please do feel free to correct us. But also remember that we're just, as our good friend Nicole DeMonesis always says, doing what we can with what we have. Before we get into this week's film, Black Girl, and its director, Ousmane Sembène, Erin, as our designated French speaker, I'd like to talk about the actual French title, La Noire de. In French, it has a cruel double meaning. It translates to literally the black girl of, which immediately establishes Douana as property. She is of the Monsieur and Madame in Antibes, but there's a darker layer. Noir can also refer to a black thing or a black object. So the phrase black girl doesn't quite transmit the cruel double meaning of the title. But Erin, with that in mind, what were your opening thoughts on Ousmane Sembène's Black Girl?
Last week you said that Tuki Buki was sort of a prequel, and I really hope that's not true. I mean, I know it's technically not. I would really hate to see the characters from Tuki Buki in a situation that Douana was in. It was really tragic, honestly. And it just struck me that this has been going on forever. It's still going on with the release of the Epstein files. We can still see how people are taken advantage of by folks with more money and power than they have. It just made me think of that, because it's not just women and girls, it's anybody. You know, if they're in a vulnerable position where they want to get a better situation for themselves, like the workers that built the stadiums in the Emirates for the World Cup. It was basically slave labor. They were promised construction jobs and moved from their home countries to the Emirates, where they had to live in horrible conditions and had no freedom whatsoever. And so seeing that happen, to Douana was hard to watch, honestly.
Sheila, obviously this wasn't your first viewing, and you also have a little bit more experience with Sembène than the rest of us, so I'm very interested in how you see this fitting with some of his later work.
This is the very first film I ever saw from him, and then I continued to see, I think, 4 or 5 other ones. I saw enough to make the very interesting bridge to Mambete. In Tuki Buki, we see a lot of things that are apparently taken from this. For example, one of the first scenes we see is the postman. It seems like he's on a bridge, which looks very much like the bridge that we see her walking up to get into the ship. The ship is also clearly a very important part of Mambete's film. There are many aspects that I find he apparently was trying to say, I disagree with a lot of things about what Sembène is saying, and as a result, I'm going to say it in a different way. The confrontation, when she's telling the story of how everything started, we see her looking for a job in different buildings, and the meeting of this young black man is also very connected with the intellectuality that we see in the other film. I see many, many things that he's connecting from the black girl. She looks from the beginning, with the exception of when she gets the job, she's not happy. And she doesn't live in a very good situation, at least in my eyes. For those who don't know it, when she comes out and there's a person smoking the pipe and asks her, "Where are you going?" That seems to be her father. That is Ousmane Sembène. That is the director of the film. And he plays a lot of roles like that, small roles in his films. But that situation where he says, "Where are you going?" tells me that this adult woman, who could be anywhere between 24 and 31, her father is asking, "Where are you going?" at that age. And I find that is not a really good picture of her life in her country. Also, the attractiveness, at least in some eyes, of how she dresses, how she carries herself, is very elegant. The first scene where she's entering the ship, where you see one single black woman, well dressed, quite elegant, amongst hundreds of white individuals. I mean, the whole story is exactly the opposite of what Mbete was doing with his film. The lineage of the story, the how it flows, also the carrying of water that we see at the beginning. There's a lot of things that now I see very clearly he took from Ousmane, not necessarily to do the same, but to contradict or to enhance. Or so I'll start with that. But there's a lot of interesting things that I saw this time around.
And that gives me an opportunity to correct myself from last week, because I had confused the two films and thought that she was a college-educated woman in this, like the woman in Tuki Buki, and that's incorrect. She's actually illiterate.
She's very simple. Yes, she's very simple.
You had corrected me on that last week, and that is a difference between the two. I did think that watching Tuki Buki, it felt like it was a reaction to Black Girl. But to Sembène's credit, I think the reason why Tuki Buki works is because Sembène had, to use my locksmith metaphor from last week, Sembène would be the architect. He built the building that Mbete could break into. By contrast, this is a much starker film. This is a much drier film. It's very, very quiet. It doesn't have a lot of big scenes, whereas, of course, Tuki Buki is all big scenes. Structurally, I don't think the two have a lot in common. It is that version of the story of the idealization of leaving Dakar to go to France that they have in common. And as Sila points out, a lot of the same locations, it's shot in a lot of the same locations in Dakar that Tuki Buki was. Jennifer, obviously this is not done in the herky-jerky kind of a style of Tuki Buki, but on the other hand, especially in its ending, I think it has just as much of the shocking, sometimes even gratuitous violence of Tuki Buki, but it's all contained in one scene. What was your reaction to the more steady hand of Sembène on this type of material as compared to the more frenetic, which is something that you had a little bit of trouble adjusting to last week with Tuki Buki?
It's a great question. I did notice that it was certainly more somber. It had an incredible amount of stark contrasts, a lot of white palette across the board, white being a strong word there. And I agreed with Aaron that it was horrific, tragic thing to watch, a brutal thing to watch. There was also this calm pacing and there were beautiful shots, right? Some beautiful images, some beautiful shots, even an elegance in this woman trying to carry herself and with her clothes and dressing up every day and excited about this thing. Pretty and calm and clean, but then just behind the mask of that was the brutality and the classism and the colonialism and the racism and objectification of this woman and others, and the disillusionment of her. She was so excited to go, I'm getting away. I'm getting to do this. This is an opportunity. And then finding herself just so trapped, right? In this prison of what she thought was going to be this expansive opportunity. And it closed off her world, right? She went to moving around Dakar to trapped in this, I guess inside and a little bit outside, but mostly in this apartment and just in front of it, or, that her world became so much smaller instead of expanding. And that was all projected with this calm, steady, you like slowly slide or melt into this realism of how horrific this is. It went from those pretty images to just more the horrific, brutal realization of what was happening. I thought she was going to leave and try to get herself home. And she left and got herself home, but in her head, there's spoilers. She left by leaving the planet in the beautiful tub that they spent time showing how, like, she cleaned it, how white and clean and sterile the tub was. And then she went in that tub and just bloodied it. And it was a real brutal contrast. And I didn't expect that. I didn't know that was going to happen. I knew she was upset, but I thought, okay, cool. I was excited. I'm like, she's going to say, screw you. I'm taking my mask and my things and I'm going home, or I'm going somewhere else.
I kind of thought the same thing, but I'd already read a spoiler about what was going to happen. It was just so, it's like, it looks like she's going to go home. It looks like she's going to pack her things and go, and then she didn't. And so, yeah, I even knew it was coming and still was surprised when it did.
I was floored by it. I was like, whoa. And I, let wind out of my sails. I was saddened, disillusioned. I don't know. It hammered at another level. And so, yes, I guess the choice to have her commit suicide rather than run away and go home hammered the point home even harder, because it was shocking and sad. And yeah.
Which raises the question, this was, of course, based on a short story by Sembène from one of his collections, and it's told from her point of view. If she committed suicide, who's telling the story?
Is that a trick question?
No, it isn't. It's a point.
Because she cannot relate to us the way Monsieur goes to bring the mask back. So at some point, she cannot be telling the story.
Is he telling the story, the Monsieur, or are we a fly on the wall? Is it?
He seems to be the most neutral character because he's involved all the time, but he never has a real opinion.
He's not racist, but he's not correct. Racist.
No,
which is get used to that phrase, because that's how I described next week's film Coonskin, which has been accused of racist, and I said it's not racist.
No, he's quite simple. He has a very simple mind. We don't find out what he does for a living, what his profession is. These people are not poor, but we never see them doing anything. But he's very neutral. He doesn't change in any way. She transforms herself. I don't know why. And I was going to allude to that later on, because I find very interesting when you see the movie more than once, then you are surprised, or I was surprised to see how nice she was at the beginning. She touches her.
Well, when she's surrounded by other people in Dakar and in Senegal, of course she is. But once she has her isolated and away from her people, there's no need to be nice anymore.
No, that's not true. Think of the beginning when she's showing her the house. She touches her. She's very friendly, and they're alone in the apartment. At the beginning, she's very warm to her.
Aaron, this is the beginning of one of our favorite conversations that we have. What type of relationships start like that?
Abusive. That's the love bombing phase.
Oh, okay. That's a very interesting point.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, though, if something happens.
I love reoccurring themes, but that's not one of my favorites. Usually it's like, oh, that's a reoccurring, but then it's like, no, that's a reoccurring theme.
Yeah. But I also wonder if something happened that we didn't see because it was from Duana's perspective and not Madame's. because it seemed like Madame was dealing with depression and taking it out on Diwana. So I don't know if it was meant to be abusive from the beginning, or if something changed and it became abusive as it went on.
Sembène has a good psychological profile made up of the Madame character. The husband character, not so much. Sela points out he's a bit of a nebulous creature. He drinks too much, and that's pretty much it. She has the little tics that he shows where she's constantly like futzing with one foot and then the other, and she's constantly doing this thing where she's pulling the heel of her shoe off and then putting it back on. He is definitely suggesting, as Aaron has said, that there is something psychological going on.
I think that Monsieur was just as bad in a different way, because he saw how his wife was treating Diwana and didn't do anything about it at all. Didn't call his wife out, didn't try to help.
He's not racist.
Yeah, he's a dick.
He may not be racist, but he's not.
Yeah, instead of overt racism, it's covert racism. He's just allowing these things to happen when he could have helped.
Going back to the title and the mask starts out as a gift. It becomes a commodity. Then it's a trophy, and it's hung up on the wall. Then it's something that they fight over. And in the very last scene, it's a ghost of the life that he stood by and let be snuffed out, as her little brother puts the mask back on and just follows him. And I think that, like the psychological profile of the Madame, is a very deep and very perceptive metaphor that Sembène has come up with to tell this story through, and it really, really brought it home to me. That scene of the boy following him, wearing the mask, and him hurriedly getting into the car was much more horrifying than the ending of several horror films that I've seen.
Yeah, it looked like anything could happen. The kid was following with the mask. There were other guys following too, from closer to Diana's home. It felt like Africa itself was pushing him out. Like he was not meant to be there. He needed to go. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, I remember feeling the same way the first time I saw the film. This Africa kicking him out. I find this whole approach, when we compare the two filmmakers, I find the whole approach has a lot to do with what I see as their mentalities and their intentionalities. To me, Sembène is more like, especially when it comes to film, because I don't know his books anyway, and the way he uses the camera, the way he tells the story, a little bit minimalistic. I think of a person who's quite intelligent, like Bergman. And with Mbete, I see somebody who's quite intelligent in his language, but more like Tarantino. The approaches are completely different. I could see that he was trying to say something about what Sembène said, but at the same time, the starting point for both has nothing to do with one another, in my opinion. He's addressing colonialism, he's addressing a lot of things in there, and I find that Mbete is just dealing with a crazy young black couple who is just a little bit wild, intellectually wild.
Well, they're not revolutionaries the way Sembène was, No. She's a part of the and she's actually abandoning it. Sembène began his political life on the docks, actually organizing unions there. I mean, deeply committed to these type of things. But we go back to the Laval Decree from 1934 that we talked about last week, where the French colonists in Africa weren't allowed to make their own films. Ironically, when Sembène decided, well, I can't reach the majority of the people I want to talk to in Senegal because they're illiterate through novels, I have to learn filmmaking. Because of the Laval Decree, he actually had to go to Moscow to learn his trade. The very colonial system that he was rebelling against had forced him to become even more committed to communism. But I did want to kind of parallel Joanna to another character, Watanabe, in Ikiru. I think both of them are making the exact same mistake, and I think there is something about, even though I doubt very highly that either Kurosawa saw any of Sembène's work or Sembène saw any of Kurosawa's work, there is something that these two great minds had come together, and that is both of them are looking for meaning in a system that only sees them as a part of the function. Again, the mask is the center of that. She brings the mask as a gift. She's giving them a piece of her identity, and the French hang it up on the wall as a trophy. If anything symbolizes the double meaning of the French title, that moment where they're just, well, hey, she gave us a mask. What are we going to do with it? She gave her brother 50 francs, which is a lot of money for a poor girl in Dakar, because she wanted to say, thank you for the opportunity. This is a part of me. And they end up fighting over it in that one of the few times the camera moves, the whirlwind kind of 360-degree turn scene, and one is fighting over a piece of her identity, and then the madame is just fighting over, well, no, that's my trophy. I earned it. I think that is the deepest metaphor of the whole film.
The gentleman that has been invited by them, who gets up and looks at her like a trophy, not because that's his trophy, but just like a piece in a museum, looks at her and then gets up and says, "I've never kissed a black woman before." The whole handling of her is quite disgusting, but it's based on this exotism. It's very exotic. However, the same exotic aspect, just like in Membete's Tukibuki, when we see him towards the beginning of the film taking the highway or the roadway, and you see the signs for Nice and Cannes, the exotism is also seen the same way in the eyes of the black people. Because why does she want to go to France? Why does she imagine shopping in big stores? Because she has also this exotic view of what it means to be in France. She has an exotic view of working for white people, and that's why she goes around that friend saying, I got a job with white people. It's so weird, this excitement that she has because she's going to be working for a white person, which is actually a stupid thought. This exotic aspect is coming from both sides.
But she claims that the madame lied to her and told her all about the shops of southern France, and she was sold a bill of goods.
There's a couple of things that I think are mistakes, perhaps, in my view. Sembène does not explain the transition. He doesn't explain why has she been asked to take care of the kids and suddenly there are no kids. That's not explained. And that is very good reasoning for her to be doing what she's doing. She keeps cleaning and there are no kids. But Sembène does not explain why are the kids not there.
And how come she hadn't been paid before?
That's weird.
That's all part of the trafficking.
Well, and the mother, yeah, because you once you pay them, they can leave.
Yeah,
I remember I used to be a manager, and every time I had a new hire, I used to take their coat and lock it in a closet so that they wouldn't run away at lunchtime, because they'd at least have to come back for their coat.
Damn, dude.
Well, it was a terrible place to work, and I wouldn't blame them. Under normal circumstances, say, yes, run free, but I can't run the store by myself.
Well, there's another very confusing aspect about the relationship, if you can call it that, between the black girl and the madame. I experienced that myself with the person I used to work for. He had problems with the way I dress. For him, I did not dress.
Before you continue, for our listeners who haven't seen Steele, he is the snazziest dresser in the world. This guy
stop.
This guy wears a suit to go shopping at Walmart. Okay, go ahead.
I don't remember the last day I have been at Walmart, but I see what you say. Anyway, back to reality. She has an incredible problem which I find difficult to explain where that comes from, even though I think it's logical because, like I said, I experienced that myself. Why does she have such an incredible problem with her maid dressing like a normal, elegant person? Is that racism? Is that exotism? I found that very interesting, the way he puts that in there. And that is perhaps the beginning of what makes her go crazy. You look like you're going to a party. You're supposed to be clean. She has a big problem with that. And I don't know why. I think there's a certain transition, which you alluded to before, psychologically, that is going on in this woman because she handles even her husband in a kind of nasty way.
Makes her take off her shoes and like hobbles her in the house. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, because
sorry.
like the guy with his coat in the closet, she can't leave.
I think it's a mix of racism and classism because Diana is the help.
Yes.
She has to know her place. And that's both coming from a racist angle and a classist angle because, I mean, France is pretty classist. Not as bad as some other places, but Europe in general,
Yes.
pretty classist.
Now, if they would have ever gone out shopping together, I would like to know, in my logic world, do I want, as a white person, go with a black woman that is dressed lesser than me? And as a result, I'm dealing with a person that's lower than me? Or do I want to be seen as someone who owns a black girl that dresses well?
I think she'd still rather have Diana dress more like a servant because she's the lady of the house and she has to be above her servants. It's just part of that classism. I want to go back to exotic. That term, I think it has different connotation for white people, basically, in Europe and America. Basically, it means anybody that's not white. So when the guy kissed her, which was bullshit. He shouldn't have done that. He'd never kissed a black woman before, and it was just because she's so different. It's like another kind of being, not necessarily an entire human, you know? And following that train of thought, it goes back to the title. The word he used for her was négresse, and the title is la noire de, which is the black person of, or the black of, and
well, it'd be black girl because of the la. So it'd be the black girl of, or the black woman of.
Yeah, the title la noire de means the black feminine object of whatever, because it cuts off. It just stops with de. So the black could be anything. Could be.
Let's look at what the double meaning is. Is she the black girl of Dakar, or is she the black girl of the Monsieur and the Madame?
That's why it's ambiguous. It could go either way. And that's the thing, is like in the title, it's more of a description of an object. Could be a person, could be an animal, could be a plate, could be, a leaf off of a tree, could be anything. Négresse is specifically for a black woman. And so it's interesting that they used both terms in the film. I think that the title is specific.
But don't forget that also the young student does not treat her well. So it could be, I think the de is referring to the possession and not necessarily to a certain relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems unfortunate to me that the American translation of the title of Black Girl lessens the powerful way the title should have been translated. To me, am I hearing that right? I mean, it seems really unfortunate.
Yes, I agree, but that is an eternal problem in any situation. Translations, I keep saying, do not really exist
because they're so subtly that you have to interpret it towards your perspective.
It takes too long, and sometimes it is impossible to translate a context. And somebody was asking me something the other day in Spanish, and I started looking for it, and suddenly I had to say to him, wow, that's interesting. In Spanish, we never say that. Never. And as a result, you cannot translate it. And when you translate it, you're not saying what the text actually means. And I think that happens a lot of times.
That reminds me of when some German friends of mine were telling jokes to each other in German and then tried to tell them in English, and they weren't funny. And they like tell the
Yeah,
joke. They were laughing
correct.
their
Yeah.
asses off, and they tell the joke. It's like, why are plums purple? Because the farmer chokes the trees. There's got to be
Well,
some wordplay in there.
well, they were laughing their German asses off because they have German asses.
This is true. This is true. They couldn't have. But yeah, I mean, yeah, but there had to be some wordplay in there that like, they could not translate into English, and that's exactly
Yeah,
what you're
that
saying.
happens all the time. The word happy does not exist in the German language. When you
But
say,
to Aaron's
funny in
point,
and of
do you
itself.
think the cutting between the mask and Joanna's face is something that highlights that in a way, that brings that version of the title home to you? Like, had you known that was the which Aaron, you did because you speak French, but knowing that those intercuttings and the fading from one to the other take on a different resonance?
I would go back to translation and interpretation. And I know nothing about masks. I don't know what their spiritual and psychological meaning is in Japan or in Africa or in different parts of Africa. But we don't know, because we're not Africans or we're not from Senegal, we don't know what a mask like that means for Sembène or for the black girl. And we don't know, when she's putting it and playing with it, what is the connection that she knows in her culture that is being displayed with the mask, which of course gets destroyed once she gives it to the monsieur and madame, who are not able ever to understand what actually means to get a mask. So I think that's a problem in translation again.
I do think it's interesting that back to back on the two African films that we've covered, that we as Westerners are able to dial into this kind of symbolism without a huge amount of knowledge about Senegal or Dakar. And how these two films, which are out of that era, really the two African films that are best remembered, utilize that symbolism so much that, quite honestly, that Tuki Buki episode, I had to, just to keep the episode from running so long it would be too big a file to upload, cut out large amounts of us analyzing symbolism. What did the motorcycle mean? What did the thing on the back of the motorcycle mean? And things like that. Because to cut out even a part of that section, you would miss the whole point, because we as a roundtable were really dialed into that symbolism. But I don't think we as a roundtable are more apt to notice these things. I think there's something about African film that uses this symbolism in a universal way that you can just completely understand it. I think that's what Sembène really brings to his cinema, because there's nothing about his camera, as Jennifer pointed out, there are several very beautiful shots, but there's nothing about his camera technique or the photography of the film that is in any way, shape, or form revolutionary. It is the juxtaposition, the mise en scène, and the images and the symbolism within them that I think makes this a film that we are still talking about all these years later.
Yes, but my point is that we know that there's symbolism behind it, but we have no clue as to what it symbolizes. We don't know what it means to put a mask on your face or on your cheek or on the top of your head, or carry it with one hand or carry it with two hands. They all have meanings. In Japan,
and yet it's just
different.
as powerful a symbol without that back knowledge, because that is just as ghostly an image of that child basically chasing him. He's not literally chasing him, but it's filmed as if he's chasing him wearing a mask. The mask, from the opening of the film all the way through, is the thing that carries us through from scene to scene and brings us back to this theme of the black girl of a lot of the African artists that I have encountered, but especially Sembène and last week's director Mbeti, very, very good at finding these kind of archetypes that are so incredibly universal that we didn't need to know the backstory of that Eastern Orthodox, which is why I cut it out of last week's episode, our discussion of it, of that Eastern Orthodox cross on the back of the motorcycle, to know that it meant something, that it was there when the goat was sacrificed, and also, you know, when the couple were having sex on the beach. And it leaves it just open enough to interpretation that we can have that conversation and it be intelligent without us actually knowing its background. Then once Jennifer Googled its context, it meant something completely different, because then suddenly we were talking about the imposition of the West, or how did he get the cross, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think it deepened the conversation, because there is something subtle about the use of these symbols, that their actual meaning is irrelevant to what they actually are symbolizing. That mask, to me, the Western guy, symbolized the transition from a personal object to a piece of conquest, a piece of property, then something to be contested over, and then after her death, a ghost. The quiet genius of somebody like Sembène, who, without flashy camera movements or weird angles, with very little camera movement, because he was using these huge surplus cameras that he could get, and he was shooting on leftover 35 millimeter film and had to do things in long one takes and things like that, is able to get things like that across without, as Scylla pointed out, any knowledge of what that mask meant before we see it in the film.
I felt like the shape of the mask was interesting, because having read spoilers for what was going to happen, when she had the mask and she put it on her own face, the way that it was shaped, it looked like there was a slit right around her throat area. I was wondering if that was like some foreshadowing, if the mask really symbolized her and that's part of her story.
I didn't notice that. That's excellent, Aaron. But it is a piece of her identity. And the French just hang it on the wall as a trophy. And then it becomes a trophy to be fought over.
Yeah, that's colonialism. They don't appreciate the people, they just want the stuff.
People did not get this back in 1966, at least the critics didn't. I mean, even Roger Ebert, who likes everything, gave this a negative review, because I remember reading his review and being absolutely outraged, because Roger Ebert is how I ended up getting into movies in the first place, because at the back of his home video companion, he had the sight and sound list, and I decided one day I was going to go through and watch the top 10 films on the sight and sound list, and that's how I ended up. That's my villain origin story, you know. He kind of tried to rate it as like a Hollywood film and called the film primitive.
Ah, did he now?
Yeah. And he called Sembène a journeyman, which is interesting, to call the guy who was able to break the Laval Decree and basically invent the architecture of African cinema a journeyman, especially since how much African film had Roger Ebert at that time experienced in 1966. And by the way, I would say zero. And because a journeyman, that's like a hobbyist, right? You know, that's somebody who picks up a camera on the weekends to film their kids. He said that Sembène seemed to be learning on the job while making this film, but he wasn't learning on the job. He had been through the best film school in Moscow, the one that produced Eisenstein, the one that produced Turnip. I mean, you know, quite honestly, I don't see how anyone can look at, as Jennifer pointed out, the beauty of the images, the simplicity of the mise en scène in this film, the symbology throughout it, and call anybody a journeyman. I think he does give himself away at the end when he says he doesn't think that Sembène gives enough character depth to the two white characters in this film.
Wow.
Wow.
That's 1966 for you. Although admittedly, I'm sure there's a lot of people now that wouldn't understand it either. We're living in the worst timeline.
But you know what? Ebert was not alone. It was not well received at the time, quite honestly. And that's why we had to watch a restored print, because it had been let to rot and had been forgotten. And when Sembène was talked about, he was talked about Scylla. What was the film that we did in Clubhouse with it took place in Dakar, and the capitalist, he couldn't get an erection on his wedding night, so he let all the people spit on him who he'd ever wronged.
Did you just dream that?
No.
It's one of your dreams? Okay.
He did. We did it in Scylla's room, but
You have to tell me about another scene. I don't have a reference to that.
so the guy has 3 wives. It opens with the French being kicked out of Senegal. The corrupt businessmen come in with a bunch of briefcases full of money.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that film.
No, I don't remember either. I really don't remember.
And the camera work is a lot shakier than this because he was using handheld cameras. It was made in 1974. He was obviously influenced somewhat by Mambetty, but it's actually a good film, though. It's a great film. I'm really selling it short because it's actually a very entertaining film.
Xala, Xala.
Yes, that could be it.
That is it. Yes.
Nailed it. Love the. Nailed it. Ha. Sorry. Whoops.
He didn't. Not that night.
He didn't
anyway.
nail it.
So also was his first film in color, but it is interesting that was actually held in much more regard than Black Girl.
1975, often associated with the 1970 production, is a Senegalese film about a corrupt businessman, El Hadji Abdou Kadar Beye, who was cursed with sexual impotence, the Xala, is that what that's called, on his wedding night with a 3rd wife. It's a political satire symbolizing the failure of the post-colonial African bourgeois. Okay.
It's a gross ending. It is, and that is what Sembène does. And he was still making films.
A gross ending, another gross ending? Is that his thing?
He made a film in 2003 about female circumcision.
Nope.
Ironically enough, is one of his more entertaining films. It's interesting. It's weird, but because it's about,
just that statement is odd.
Oddly enough, because it's about a woman who refused to let her daughter go through the procedure, and her daughter is kind of looked at as an outcast because she didn't go. But it's actually it's weird. He takes these things that you just and he makes very, very good films out of them. This doesn't feel like, to me, it didn't feel like a social realism. The ending actually had a shock factor to it, but none of these films feel to me like Eat Your Vegetables type films. There is an edge to Sembène that I really think he is able to handle this type of material in a way that I can't think of a Western director who'd be able to do this material and handles it with enough grace, with enough distance. He can get his message across without, never feel like I'm being preached at. I never feel like I'm watching an afternoon special. Black Girl, after this restoration, the version that we watched off of the Internet Archive, is an absolutely beautiful film. When I first saw Black Girl, it was the same experience I've had explained about things like The Organizer, where I was watching an old 16 millimeter print. The soundtrack was off. There were huge chunks missing. That's why I didn't know she was illiterate, because that scene wasn't in the version of Black Girl that I had seen. Or that scene was so cut up because there were just little bits missing because they had been eaten by the projector, and that was the only way you could see a film like Black Girl back then. So this film really fell into disuse, and they had to go through a lot of care to be able to restore it for us to be able to see it the way that we do.
Interesting how easily things can change, right? Little things moving or being removed. I was trying to look at something in the credits, and I had seen that they have voices for these. Like Douane's voice is someone else. The Madame's voice is another actor. Was it all done in post? Was that done for a reason? Did the woman that played Douane not speak French? I don't know what happened with that. Can anyone answer that?
That's just every film in 1966 that was done on a low budget. He was using surplus cameras that were way too loud to be able to shoot sound. The Nagra 2 recorders that they were using, for instance, the social realism kitchen sink dramas, they were able to capture live sound with, hadn't made it quite to Africa or France yet. They were still very expensive, very, very exclusive, and so you would have had you have a huge sound truck and things like that. You wouldn't have been able to film in that small apartment the way that he did. The fact of the matter is, the thought process back then was, if you are post-dubbing it anyway, why stick yourself with the same cast? That way you can cast people who look physically perfect for the role, and then cast somebody who vocally would be better for the role. And the other thing is, you're just arranging people's schedules, because this was shot in, I think, 21 days. They had the actors for that amount of time. Well, then he edits it together, and then a year later they go to put a soundtrack together. Getting those people back together would cost too much, so instead you just hire a different cast.
That all makes sense, and thank you for explaining that.
I would also strongly suggest to watch, just like that is the case with many films, to watch this film a second time. I was amazed at the differences I saw, because the transition from the beginning to the end gets lost, because you sink into that end and then go back to the beginning. I think it's very interesting.
Once you're aware of the end, it changed your viewing, like in picking up symbols like the mask symbol that Aaron picked up on.
The thing that shocked me the most, I have mentioned that already, how nice I'm not saying she was genuinely nice, but at the beginning of the film, when she walks into the house, she actually touches Diana on her arm. She's very nice to her. She's showing her the apartment. She says, you see Nice there, you see Cannes there. She's very gentle to her. And I got so drawn into the middle and the end of the film that I forgot that there is a transition in the way she treats her. And I find that's very important in the film, even though I cannot understand why she transitions from being like that to being, quite bad.
Well, I think that's another one of the shock factors that Sembène uses to tell his stories.
When I watched it, I was like, okay, I watched it. I got the story. I wanted to know. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to learn this weekend along with everyone else. Why is this film so significant in world cinema history? The symbolism in the story is one. On a technical standpoint, as a filmmaker, I think I've learned that getting to make a film at all in that era and having access to the cameras and making films. But is there more that you can elaborate for me, Eric and Sela? Or Aaron, everybody, not me.
Social realism. Taking a story and telling the story from a realistic point of view. By the way, this was based on a true story. With no pulled punches. Put yourself back in 1966 and think of a film before 1966 or a play. Go through Tennessee Williams, go through William Ng, go through anything in America that is going to give you this visceral and this shocking a look at something like this without it becoming a, in inverted commas, problem picture. This is a revolution in cinema. This shows us a different way of telling these type of stories. As big a break as those kitchen sink dramas and the Angry Young Man films that we did in the first season, which, Sela, you remember those. What a revelatory moment, something like watching Laurence Olivier's turn as Archie Rice in The Entertainer. This was as big a revelation to me as that. Or in The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, the way the narration in this is used is as big a revelation to me on how you can tell a cinematic story as that. And yeah, it is, I think, a huge step forward. However, to your point, and this is a completely legitimate, I don't think it was a hugely influential film. Because as I pointed out, at the time, in Europe, and in America, it was pretty much ignored. It did win the Jean Vigo Award, but besides that, it was a film that was pretty much had popped up and had been forgotten. Its influence, however, in Senegal was huge, to the point where there was almost a thought that a Senegalese film had to be filmed in the French language to be popular in Senegal, to the point that a film like Tuki Buki never would have been made without having this to react against.
I would say that's a common problem in different genres in different periods of time. In 1966, the world was not mature enough to see that film, and at the same time, they were immature enough to need to see that film. But that's the way. That's just the way it goes. At that point, the world couldn't handle that topic, even though that is the reason they should have handled it. And that is also the greatness of the fact that he did the film in '66. That's a very long time ago. That was a very troubled global state that we were going through, not only in Black America.
It was more important for this film to have an impact on Senegal than it was to have an impact on the rest of the world at that time. Because after, being oppressed by the French for so long, having somebody come in and say, hey, we can do this, we can tell our stories, we don't need them to try to tell our stories because they're going to do it wrong. I think it was vitally important that these films were made.
But ironically, he had to film it in French.
Well, I think
Even
we have
so.
mentioned before, but to your point, we have mentioned already the fact that Sembène was actually a writer, and he went to cinema because he felt that his people were not able to read his literature or couldn't read or whatever. But so his language and his work has a lot to do with sending messages to his people.
He was the union organizer his entire life. Everything that he did was to organize people to spread the message. The best thing you can say about him is he was extraordinarily consistent. The worst thing that you can say about him is he didn't break any rules. He didn't stretch any limits. That goes back to kind of the racial element, which is I don't think he would have been allowed to because of the racist nature of Europe at that time, where his films would have to have an appeal to be able to make their budgets back. There is something to be said about this notion that a black man or a black woman has to do things not only better than everyone else to be noticed, but also has to do things in a much more restrained way because people will not accept unrestrained behavior from people of color. And I think he was restrained by that his entire career as well. When I look at Mambéty, who I think Tuki Buki is a better film than anything that Sembène did, but Mambéty could only do that because he had somebody doing the sacrifice, doing the hard work, learning the technique, pounding the pavement like the union organizer. Without a Sembène, you have no Mambéty, just as without Marcel Carnet to react against, you have no Jean-Luc Godard. You have nothing to break into if somebody hasn't built the building.
And being able to make these films under the constraints that he had is its own kind of genius, though. He was able to make all of, his films, and they may not, as you said, have, stretched any limits, but he still made them, and people still saw them.
And they're all of them very entertaining. Even this one, with its horrifying ending. I never once looked at my watch. Well, of course, it's only an hour long. But he has films that are far over 2 hours, and I never look at my watch throughout them. I'm always engaged. He never bores me, which I can't say the same of Godard.
What I find interesting is that from the films I've seen, I find that the only one who is not really a necessity or made for his people is Black Girl. To me, Black Girl is a film directed at the world, not at his people.
That is true, but it was popular only in Senegal for decades. And I think it was because of what we would now call righteous indignation, that people were attracted to this as saying, yeah, fuck yeah, that's what's happening. Wage slavery. It's a bit like how many World War II movies just had the moral that Nazis were bad. Well, duh, we knew that, and yet we're the ones watching it, not the Nazis, not the modern day Nazis.
I would be very curious to hear from Senegalese people, educated or not, in the 70s. What was it that attracted them to this film? I would be curious to find out from them. Why did they like it? Why was it popular?
Yeah, that is an interesting thing. Were they seeing a different world too? The other side of Oz, the flip side of Wonderland. To use my metaphor from last week, Patty, Patty, Patty. Was this the darker side of the urban French fantasy? Was this a revelation to them as well? We just watched in Tuki Buki, the fantasy that if they get to Paris, everything's just going to be fine because the streets are paved with gold and the trees drip honey. Or was it honey? Or forcing things that they already knew and already... He has this annoying habit that he learned from Moscow of showing just every single detail of a scene. But here, when it's only an hour-long film, watching her completely undress from beginning to end and being shot from head to toe works very, very well. In Zala, what should be an extremely exciting scene where the businessmen are coming in with their briefcases full of cash. Celia, you remember we were joking about this in your room. You have every single one of those briefcases. You see every part of the opening process of every single one of those briefcases. And that's something that Sembène really feels he has to slow every single scene down. None of his films are unentertaining. I never look at my watch. You would think that slowing a scene down so that every single detail would make a film boring, but none of his films are boring. That is something remarkable, especially in this age of slow cinema where these are the types of techniques people are using and they're considered more poetic. There is something about the visual trance he puts you in that creates a form of visual poetry that, while not as powerful as the in-your-faceness of Tuki Buki, is a form of poetry.
I guess my question is to anyone that's listening to this, what Sembène films have you seen? What have they meant to you? Or do you have things to add or to ask about Sembène's films and their impact on world cinema history? There you go. That's the question I would have. I'm sure. And Sela's question as well. I would love if anyone has perspective from the questions that Sela asked. That would be really cool if people would write them in the comments.
We have 250 listeners in the African continent. I'd like to hear from you guys.
Me too. Yes, please. I think lots of people might not say it.
More of them are gals, statistically speaking, because we have a 60-40 female to male demographic. I have a question for you, Jennifer.
Okay, what's the question for me?
Where can people find you online?
Gilbert Baker Film Festival.lgbt and Gilbert Baker Film Fest on Instagram. And on the Instagram and other places, you'll find a link tree where you can find all things Gilbert Baker Film Festival and connections to me as well. So if you have questions or want to learn things about me or the festival, reach out. Thanks.
Sela Bloom. Pop quiz. Where can people find you on the internet?
At selablume.life. That's where I do most of my things.
And Ms. Erin Brown, where can people find you and our podcast on the internet?
You can find me on Blue Sky at Toad Puppy and on YouTube at Pizza Horse Productions. And then you can find this podcast at ko-fi.com/world cinema history. We've got all of our old episodes up there. We've got places for comments. You can leave us a tip if you want to help us upgrade our equipment and keep the podcast ad-free. And we hope to see you over there. Please leave comments. We want to interact with you guys.
And you can find me at ETROMMATER on the artist formerly known as Twitter. You can find our podcast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all your major podcasting formats. Do check us out over at pko-fi.com/world cinema history. Even the smallest recurring donation helps us out a lot. Join us next week when the Road to Dakar and Black History Month takes us into the animated world of 1975, New York City. We're going to look at Ralph Bakshi's Coonskin. And we're not going to ask, is this movie racist? As I said about the main male character in this film, it's not racist. What we are going to ask is what these black stereotypes tell us about the African American experience in the 1970s, and then we are going to follow it up, unless I am being punked. Which, Aaron, am I being punked?
I certainly hope not. I don't believe that you are.
Evan Willmott is going to come on our show, the Academy Award-winning screenwriter of Black Klansman. And we're going to discuss his 2004 mockumentary, CSA, Confederate States of America, which talks about the same black stereotypes as coonskin, but from an African-American perspective. Can that possibly be true for a tiny little pirate podcast like us, Aaron?
I believe it to be true. I'm certainly not punking you, and I don't think he is either.
All I can say is wow and stay tuned. Thanks a lot. Join us next week for Coonskin here on World Cinema History.